There are many figures in the Old Testament who are considered to be wise, but one character from the Holy Scriptures that stands out when we think of wise men is none other than the wise King Solomon, a man who is credited with unifying Israel under peace, stabilizing the economy, and building some truly magnificent structures. But like all good things, Solomon would eventually be lured away from the blessings his God had given him, and would soon stray under the pressures of his own moral temptations. For the purpose of this video though, we'll be looking at Solomon's early days, and in the infancy of his rule, where he first gained his reputation as a wise king. Solomon is described as always having been blessed and loved by God, even as a baby, given that he is considered to have been a peace offering from God to King David, after God killed David's firstborn child, having conceived the child in an adulterous relationship. Despite having 6 older half-brothers, King David was convinced by his wife, Bathsheba, and the prophet Nathan, who was said to have raised Solomon while the king was away, to make Solomon king. Evidently, there were others who believed Solomon was special, and that as a king, his potential would flourish and everyone would benefit. By electing Solomon, one might also say that it denied the ambitious Adonijah, another son of King David, from taking the throne himself. When Solomon did become king, he was very quick to vanquish his opposition and assume the role of king, although he wasn't particularly sure of himself. The story of Solomon's judgment begins where God appears to Solomon after having been pleased in the way in which he ascended the throne. He tells Solomon that he wishes to grant him anything that he desires, and that all he has to do is ask. We see how noble and some might say pure Solomon is, for he doesn't ask for power, riches, women, or any sort of otherworldly gift, but instead asks for wisdom, and wisdom alone. Solomon was aware of his own limitations, and while he was a king, he knew he could not be a good ruler if he did not possess knowledge. In a sense, you might say that this is selfless, as it appears that Solomon's only desire is to lead his people effectively under his God, as well as to keep them safe and see them prosper. Pleased that Solomon did not ask for riches and glory, and was only content with the ruling of his subjects, God granted Solomon with his request, and thus made him more wise than any other man who had ever existed. However, because Solomon was so modest in his request, and God sensed he was sincere and authentic, he went ahead and granted him riches and glory as well. From this, we can gather that the story aims to teach us humility, and that Solomon's God respects one who puts others, or the greater good, in front of their own desires. The moral here is that in seeking to serve something higher than yourself, the rewards can be greater than what you might have originally conceived. A short time after having received his wisdom from God, 2 women, some describe them as 2 prostitutes, come before Solomon with a dilemma. The women lived in the same house, and both had given birth very recently. However, one of the babies had died. It's understood that the mother of the dead baby switched her baby with the one that was alive. When this mother woke up, she realized that the dead baby in her possession was not hers. She confronted the other woman, but she denied all knowledge of this and denied the accusation made against her. King Solomon was deemed the only man astute enough to determine who the real mother was. It seems Solomon was swift in his decision too, though he did not simply pick without reason. He called for a sword and told one of his servants to cut the baby in half so that both of the women would have a piece of the child. The fake mother accepted this decision, but the other woman cried out that despite being the baby's real mother, she was willing to surrender custody of the baby to the other woman if the baby was allowed to live. Realizing that this woman loved the child so much that she was willing to give it up so that it might survive, Solomon deduced that she had to have been the real mother. When the people learned of how Solomon had ingeniously solved the problem, his reputation as the wise king began to spread. The 2 women in question are never named, but it's understood that the 2 are prostitutes, or at the very least, widows, given the absence of their husbands. In biblical accounts and the nature of patriarchal society, the husbands were usually responsible for the solving of issues between women. If such an incident was brought before the king, it would be the husbands of these women who would represent them in court. A Jewish interpretation explores the idea that the 2 women are related, one being the mother-in-law and the other being the daughter-in-law. Both, though, had given birth after their respective husbands had died. Due to a custom, the daughter-in-law who was the liar in this case would have to marry her brother-in-law. As her brother-in-law was the living child, she was required to marry him when he came of age. By lying about the boy being her own child, she would not be required to marry him. But when Solomon suggested cutting the child in half, this would absolve her of any responsibility to the child at all. So she was all but willing to agree to the murder of the child. Another interpretation highlights the maternal instincts of a woman, that they can be so strong, one might fabricate a drastic lie in order to maintain their child, or in this case, maintain the facade of having a child at all. Other ideas suggest that the two women were rivals, and that the woman who had lost her child succumbed to the mindset that if she couldn't keep her baby, then her rival shouldn't have kept hers either. From this standpoint, we see the vindictiveness of what a bitter rivalry can lead us to, that a woman in this instance would sooner see the death of an innocent baby than see her rival have the upper hand. The two women also remain unnamed, not necessarily to downplay their importance as women, but more so to enhance Solomon's character and make him and only him the focal point of this tale. In this instance, Solomon is the hero, and it is his wisdom, which God gave him, which brings about the restoration of order in this scenario. Another variation to exemplify King Solomon's wisdom is after his reputation reaches the ears of Queen Sheba. Sheba, seeking to test Solomon, brings him two sets of flowers, one of which is real and the other that is artificial. She asks Solomon to determine which is the real set of flowers, given that they look virtually the same. Unable to simply decide, much like with the two women, Solomon resorts to a logical solution, whereby he has the windows of the palace opened. Two bees fly in and parade around the real set of flowers, given that only the real flowers were capable of attracting the bees in the first place. Through this, Solomon is easily able to determine which set of flowers were real. Once more, Solomon's wisdom is demonstrated and done so effortlessly, that he does not exert himself at all to come to a conclusion. It serves to show us just how wise he is, and how great his God is, given that his wisdom came from his God, that he can solve conundrums that would stump the average man. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, then feel free to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll be covering more on Solomon in later videos, but in the meantime, don't forget to leave your suggestions for more videos below. Until the next time guys.